Hello, I'm Garry Stevens, and welcome to the History in the Bible podcast. All the history, in all the books, in all the Bibles. Episode 1.21. Moses farewells his people. In the last episode, we left the book of Numbers and the Israelites on the verge of entering the promised land of Canaan. But before the conquest, Moses spends the entire book of Deuteronomy on a valediction. Deuteronomy is the fifth and final book of the Torah, the Pentateuch. It is also known as Mishnah Torah, copy of the teaching, because the heart of the book, chapters 12 to 26, are a great law code. The authors of the Septuagint translated that as Deuteronomus, second law. Scrolls of Deuteronomy are amongst the most popular found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, ranking just after the Psalms. Although the book is attributed to Moses, we have very good reasons for thinking that it was composed in the last century of the Kingdom of Judah. The authors, we think, were religious reformers, writing during the reigns of Kings Hezekiah and Josiah, determined to centralize all worship on Jerusalem. I'll explore that idea in detail in later episodes. Deuteronomy is set in the Israelite encampment on the plains of Moab. The people are poised to enter Canaan 40 years after leaving Egypt. Before he dies, Moses addresses his people one last time in three great speeches of a length that would have given Fidel Castro or Hugo Chavez pause. But unlike their ramblings, the speeches of Moses are especially touching. Moses knows that the Israelites will conquer, and he also knows that he will never be part of that conquest. In the middle of his second speech, a full 14 chapters, Moses lays out the final great law code of the Pentateuch. It is thought that this legal code is the earliest part of the book. Let's get started. Moses' first speech sets the stage. He gives a historical review, retelling the story we've read in Exodus and Numbers. He wants the Israelites to reflect on their journey from Egypt. Moses' recollection is selective, though. He describes the events of his youth in a way that accentuates God's loyalty and God's fulfillment of the covenant. Moses recalls the Israelites' two victories to date against King Og of Bashan and Sihon of Heshbon. He mentions them so often, you begin to wonder if Moses is losing track of his thoughts. In just the first 4 chapters, he evokes the victories over these kings 8 separate times. Chapter 4 introduces the concept of a canon, a body of literature that is somehow set apart and sacred. Quote, Deuteronomy 4:1. And now, O Israel, give heed to the laws and rules that I am instructing you to observe, so that you may live to enter and occupy the land that Yahweh, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You shall not add anything to what I command, or take anything away from it, but keep the commandments of Yahweh your God that I enjoin upon you. End quote. Deuteronomy is full of warnings not to change anything in the text. That Deuteronomy itself introduces legal concepts not found in Exodus or Leviticus is an irony lost on the author. Moses recalls God's appearance at Sinai. Contradicting most of the description in Exodus, the Israelites hear but do not see God. The earthy God who strolled with Adam and Abraham shall no longer walk with the Israelites. Quote, Deuteronomy 4:10. The day you stood before Yahweh your God at Horeb, you came forward and stood at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was ablaze with flames to the very skies, dark with densest clouds. Yahweh spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but perceived no shape, nothing but a voice. For your own sake, therefore, be most careful, since you saw no shape when Yahweh your God spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire, not to act wickedly, and make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness whatever." End quote. Right after these verses, Moses has a few words to say against the sun and moon cults common in the Middle East. But he also lets drop a hint of the old Israelite religion. Quote, Deuteronomy 4:19. "And when you look up to the sky, and behold the sun and the moon and the stars, the whole heavenly host, you must not be lured into bowing down to them or serving them. These Yahweh your God allotted to other peoples everywhere under heaven." End quote. Don't worship the sun or the moon or the stars. God has allotted these celestial beings to other peoples. It all sounds like the old Canaanite god El at the head of a pantheon, an El who has assigned the nations to all his children. Towards the end of his first speech, Moses warms to one of his main themes. The Jewish Study Bible puts it rather prosaically. Quote, Deuteronomy 4:25. "When you have begotten children, and children's children, and are long established in the land, should you act wickedly and make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness, causing Yahweh your God displeasure and vexation, I call heaven and earth this day to witness against you that you shall soon perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. You shall not long endure in it, but shall be utterly wiped out." End quote. As usual, the Schocken Bible brings home the force of the original Hebrew. Quote, "When you beget children and children's children, and you grow old in the land, should you wreak ruin by making a carved image in the form of anything, thus doing what is ill in the eyes of Yahweh your God, vexing him, I call as witness against you today the heavens and the earth, that you shall perish, yes, perish quickly. From off the land that you are crossing the Jordan thither to possess, but you will not prolong days upon it, but you will be destroyed, yes, destroyed." End quote. I discussed in episode 1.7 how we owe our Old Testament chapter divisions to Stephen Langton, Archbishop of Canterbury, around 1220. Langton usually did a decent job of dividing a complex text, but sometimes he made a mess of things. Moses' first speech obviously ends at chapter 4, verse 43. But Langton stuck on the first 6 verses of Moses' second speech to chapter 4. Langton should have made verse 44 the first in chapter 5. Moses' long second speech occupies chapters 5 to 28. In chapter 5, Moses presents another version of the 10 Commandments. The only real difference between the commandments given in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5 is the justification for keeping the Sabbath. Quote, Deuteronomy 5:12. "Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as Yahweh your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labour and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day of Yahweh your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son, or your daughter, your male or female slave, your ox or your ass, or any of your cattle, or the stranger in your settlements, so that your male or female slave may rest as you do. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Yahweh your God freed you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore Yahweh your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day." End quote. In Exodus 20, the Sabbath is holy because God rested on the 7th day during the creation. In Deuteronomy 5, it is wholly because of the Exodus, but for some unspecified reason. This new retelling of the Ten Commandments introduces a central tenet of modern Judaism, one that Christians might find a little odd. Moses says, quote, Deuteronomy 5:2, Yahweh our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. It is not with our fathers that Yahweh made this covenant, but with us, the living, every one of us who is here today. End quote. Recall that on the plain of Moab, there are only 3 living Israelites who knew Egypt: Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. The entire population who escaped Egypt and witnessed the theophany at Sinai are dead after 40 years in the wilderness, condemned by God in Numbers chapter 14. Yet Moses speaks to this new generation as though they had been there at Sinai. To Jews through the centuries, this passage says that every generation is bound as the first generation was, in a contract with God. Every Jew, past, present, and future, stands at the foot of Sinai and swears to the covenant. In chapter 6, Moses provides a preamble to his laws. Quote, Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Take to heart these instructions with which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on your doorposts of your house and on your gates. End quote. These verses are part of the most famous prayer in Judaism, the Shema, hear. Deuteronomy itself assigns no prominence to the verses, but they have become of central importance in Jewish liturgy and piety from the Second Temple period onwards. Many Jews recite the Shema twice a day. Now let's look at the opening verse a little more closely. I've used the Jewish Study Bible translation, which differs from the usual English version. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord is one. The Hebrew text uses God's personal name, Yahweh. No pious Jew would utter that name, substituting the word Adonai, Lord, a practice followed in English translations. The original Hebrew could mean Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one. It is not clear exactly what the writer meant by that. The Hebrew could also mean Yahweh is our God, Yahweh exclusively. Taken that way, it is a statement that Israelites are not to follow other gods. Those other foul nations may follow Baal and Ashtaroth, but you, the Israelites, must only obey Yahweh. Much of the structure of Deuteronomy may derive from the vassal treaties of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, the kingdom that destroyed Israel and was a perpetual threat to the southern kingdom of Judah in its last century. One treaty in particular has intrigued historians since its discovery in the mid-19th century. It was made by Esarhaddon, known as Ashur-Ahur-Din to his friends, one of the last great kings of Assyria. Although his father's youngest child, his father had named him as successor to the kingdom. Like any good Assyrian prince or Klingon, he had to destroy his brothers in a bloody civil war to assert that claim. Esarhaddon never forgot that struggle. In his old age, he appointed his son Ashurbanipal as his own successor. It was a brilliant choice. Ashurbanipal was the usual Assyrian murderous maniac, but he was also a scholar. Think Hannibal Lecter with an army. he was one of the few still able to read ancient Sumerian. He would go on to amass a great library that preserved a vast amount of information for us to read 2,600 years later. One of the tablets found in Ashurbanipal's library was the treaty that his father had forced on all his client states to swear to, the succession or vassal treaty of Esarhaddon. This was written in 672 BC, at about the time we think that the author of Deuteronomy was writing. Esarhaddon was determined that his son would not have to go through what he did. He bound the nations he had conquered to accept Ashurbanipal as the future ruler. Quote from the treaty: "You shall love Ashurbanipal, the great crown prince designate, son of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, your lord, like yourselves. You shall not slander his brothers, his mother's sons before Ashurbanipal, the great crown prince designate, nor speak anything evil about them, nor lift your hands against their houses, or commit a crime against them, nor take anything away from the gift which their father has given them, or the acquisitions which they themselves have made. This treaty, which Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, has confirmed and concluded with you, by making you take an oath, you shall speak to your sons and grandsons, your seed and your seed's seed, which shall be born in the future, and give them orders as follows. Guard this treaty. Do not sin against your treaty and annihilate yourselves. Do not turn your land over to destruction and your people to deportation. May this matter, which is acceptable to God and mankind, be acceptable to you too. May it be good to you." End quote. Deuteronomy contains many parallels to the Assyrian treaties. They all begin with a historical prologue and all lay out the obligations of both parties in very concrete terms. The superpower agrees to protect the vassal, and the vassal agrees to love the superpower. In Deuteronomy, the historical prologue is the rescue from Egypt. Now, Israel does not accept God's contract for mystical or philosophical reasons. It is entirely pragmatic. God agrees to protect Israel, and in return, Israel agrees to love God and to follow his laws without question. Deuteronomy introduces the idea that Israel has been chosen or elected by God. Quote, Deuteronomy 7:6, "For you are a people consecrated to Yahweh your God. Of all the peoples on earth, Yahweh your God chose you to be his treasured people. It is not because you are the most numerous of peoples that Yahweh set his heart on you and chose you. Indeed, you are the smallest of peoples. But it was because Yahweh favoured you and kept the oath he made to your fathers that Yahweh freed you with a mighty hand and rescued you from the house of bondage, from the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt." End quote. Moses, though, is very keen that the Israelites do not get some sort of superiority complex. Quote from the Shocking Bible, Deuteronomy 9:5, "Not because of your righteous merit, or because of the uprightness of your heart are you entering to possess their land, but rather because of the wickedness of these nations is Yahweh your God dispossessing them from before you. And in order that he might uphold the word that Yahweh swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, you are to know that not because of your righteous merit is Yahweh your God giving you this good land to possess. For a people hard of neck are you." End quote. In that last verse, the Hebrew connotation is that of a stubborn draft animal that will not yield to its master. Moses reinforces the idea that the Israelites are separate from all other nations, especially from those wicked people whose lands they are about to conquer. Quote, Deuteronomy 7:1. When Yahweh your God brings you to the land that you are about to enter and possess, and he dislodges many nations before you, and Yahweh your God delivers them to you, and you defeat them, you must doom them to destruction. Grant them no terms and give them no quarter. You shall not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your children away from me to worship other gods, and Yahweh's anger will blaze forth against you, and he will promptly wipe you out. Instead, this is what you shall do to them. You shall tear down their altars, smash their pillars, cut down their sacred posts, and consign their images to the fire. You shall destroy all the peoples that Yahweh your God delivers to you, showing them no pity. End quote. Moses demands that the Israelites annihilate the Canaanites. But the author of Deuteronomy was quite familiar with the history of the Israelite conquest, where the people had failed to utterly destroy the original inhabitants. As the book of Judges tells us, the conquest left many pockets of Canaanites. The author, speaking in his persona as Moses, presents an unlikely explanation for God's future failure to fulfill his promise to exterminate the Canaanites. Quote, Deuteronomy 7:22. Yahweh your God will dislodge those peoples before you little by little. You will not be able to put an end to them at once, else the wild beasts would multiply to your hurt. Yahweh your God will deliver them up to you, throwing them into utter panic until they are wiped out. He will deliver their kings into your hand, and you shall obliterate their name from under the heavens. No man shall stand up to you until you have wiped them out. End quote. So the remnants of the Canaanites are there to protect the Israelites from stray animals. Right. We are brought at last to the heart of Deuteronomy, the law code of chapters 12 to 26. Israel is to demonstrate its love and loyalty to God by observing his laws, and the nation binds itself in a ceremony at the end of the section. Some view the laws in these long 14 chapters more as stylized collections of typical cases, rather than a detailed legal code. The first chapters are straight out of the reform program in progress when the author was writing. Centralize worship at Jerusalem. Centralize religious sacrifice at Jerusalem's temple. The ancient worship practices of the Israelites closely resemble what we know of Canaanite practices. Canaanite religious ritual took place in small temples that housed cultic statues. There were stone pillars, perhaps symbols of gods or memorials to the dead. There were altars for animal and grain sacrifices. In Genesis, the patriarchs had established just these sort of altars where they pleased and worshipped God on hills and mountains. Deuteronomy is determined to quash all that, to destroy all the local cultic shrines. The author is canny enough not to mention Jerusalem by name. Since he writes in the guise of Moses, he has to pretend that Moses knows nothing of King David's future capital of the city of Jerusalem. Quote, Deuteronomy 12:13. Take care not to sacrifice your burnt offerings in any place you like, but only in the place that Yahweh will choose in one of your tribal territories. There you shall sacrifice your burnt offerings, and there you shall observe all that I enjoin upon you. End quote. In chapter 13, we see more parallels with the Treaty of Esarhaddon. Quote from the treaty. If you hear any evil, improper, ugly word, which is not seemly nor good to Ashurbanipal, from the mouth of your brothers, your sons, your daughters, or from the mouth of a prophet, an ecstatic, a dream interpreter, or from the mouth of any human being at all, you shall not conceal it, but come and report it to Ashurbanipal, the great crown prince designate, son of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria." End quote. Compare that to Deuteronomy. Quote, Deuteronomy 13:2. "If there appears among you a prophet or a dream diviner, and he gives you a sign or a portent, saying, 'Let us follow and worship another god,' even if the sign or portent that he named to you comes true, do not heed the words of that prophet or that dream diviner. As for that prophet or dream diviner, he shall be put to death, for he urged disloyalty to Yahweh your God. If your brother, your own mother's son, or your son or daughter, or the wife of your bosom, or your closest friend entices you in secret, saying, 'Come, let us worship other gods,' do not assent or give heed to him. Show him no pity or compassion, but take his life. Let your hand be the first against him to put him to death. Stone him to death, for he sought to make you stray from Yahweh your God." End quote. Deuteronomy chirpily continues with dietary rules and a long section on the liturgical calendar. In Exodus, the annual ceremonies are portrayed as family rituals, as they are today. Deuteronomy turns them into national pilgrimages, expeditions to Jerusalem. It also merges Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. These had been separate commemorations in Exodus. Chapter 20 establishes the laws of war against distant nations. Quote, Deuteronomy 20:10. "When you approach a town to attack it, you shall offer it terms of peace. If it does not surrender to you, you shall lay siege to it. And when Yahweh your God delivers it into your hand, you shall put all its males to the sword. You may, however, take as your booty the women, the children, the livestock, and everything in the town. When you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire her, and would take her to wife, you shall bring her into your house, and discard her captive's garb. She shall spend a month's time in your house, lamenting her father and mother. After that, you may come to her and possess her, and she shall be your wife. Thus you shall deal with all towns that lie very far from you, towns that do not belong to nations hereabout." End quote. I have a very worrying feeling that these are the same rules that many of the warring factions in the Middle East follow to this day. Quite different rules apply to the forthcoming conquest against the inhabitants of the Promised Land. Quote, Deuteronomy 20:16. "In the towns of the Canaanites, however, which Yahweh your God is giving you as a heritage, you shall not let a soul remain alive. No, you must proscribe them, the Hittites and the Amorites, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites, as Yahweh your God has commanded you. When in your war against a city, you have to besiege it a long time in order to capture it. You must not destroy its trees, wielding the axe against them. You may eat of them, but you must not cut them down. Are trees of the field human to withdraw before you into the besieged city?" End quote. So the Canaanites must be utterly destroyed, every single soul. But that's an odd little coda about the trees. They are spared because they cannot make a decision to flee. Yet the babies in their cribs must be killed. I'll end this episode on that grim note. I'll conclude my exploration of Deuteronomy in the next episode of the History in the Bible. Thanks for listening.